In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create an Adobe Photoshop network to Maya from scratch without just going to texturing, create PSD network. Now, really the only reason you need to do this is if you have to have a particularly high resolution image or you need some other custom set of settings. So normally I'd advise you just do it by going to texturing, create PSD network. I have a tutorial on that here. Okay, to begin with, we're going to go to Adobe Photoshop and create a new file. Now its width and height should be a power of 2. This is just generally good practice and it's better for memory management, stuff like that. I'm using 512. You could use 2048, whatever, it just should be a power of 2. Now for the resolution, this can be anything because it's really not all that important. I just leave it at 100. Color mode, RGB, and bit depth 8, and the rest can be left at their default, and click OK. Now the next thing you want to do is create a new layer. Now you want to create a new group. Go to Layer, Group Layers. You only have one layer selected though. Now inside Layer 1 we want to fill it with a solid color. Just a normal gray will be sufficient. Now we want to change Group 1's name to something a little more recognizable. Since we're going to use this texture color, I'm just going to call it Color. The next thing we need is a UV snapshot so we know where our UVs are in ratio to this image. So I'm going to go back to Maya, select our model that we want to UV map, go to Window, UV Texture Editor. Now I'm going to go to Polygons, UV Snapshot. This will take a snapshot of our UV map. So first thing we need to do is put it in a place where we can find it. Not there. Put it in here. And give it a name. The next thing you want to do is make sure Keep Aspect Ratio is checked and the size is the same resolution as your Adobe Photoshop image. Anti-aliasing, this just is if you want the Adobe Photoshop, want Maya to anti-alias these lines before it exports them. Normally this isn't necessary, so just leave it unchecked. Color, you want to make sure it's a high contrast color so you can see it when you're texturing. And image format, very important, make sure it's an image that has transparency. Something like a bitmap won't work because they don't support transparency, so something like a ping or a TIFF would be a better option. Otherwise you just import some big block of pixels and you won't be able to paint underneath them because there's no transparency. And UV range, just leave this to normal 0 to 1 and click OK. Now back to Adobe Photoshop. I'm going to minimize this window so we can see them side by side. I'm going to go to File, Open, load our UV map, and here it is with transparency. Now you could drag and drop it into this previous image that we've already created, which will be our texture, but its position won't be accurate. The best idea is to copy it. So what I'm going to do is go back to our UV snapshot layer, go to Layer, Duplicate Layer, and duplicate it into the untitled document or the document we created prior, and click OK. Now it's duplicated into this document with the exact same positioning. We don't need this anymore, so we can close it. Now in here I want to drag it out of the color group. It doesn't want to be inside that group, it wants to be above that group. Another thing it wants to have is a better name. I'm just going to call it UVs. Now the next thing I'm going to do is lock it so you can't accidentally paint on it or change it, because this needs to stay where it is. Now you would just continue painting on this like you would do any other Adobe Photoshop network. When you're done, save it. Save it in a place where you remember where it is. I'll just leave it as untitled and click Save. Make sure you save it as Adobe Photoshop format. Other file formats won't work. Make sure Layers is checked, and it isn't saving a copy because this is actually the final copy you want to texture. Now click Save. Click OK, and now you're done here. Now back in Maya. Going to select your model and assign a new material to it, unless it already has a unique material. Right now our model is assigned with Lambert 1, which is the default material, and if we were to work with this material, all the other objects that would be assigned with Lambert 1 would have the texture on it, and normally this is undesirable. So I'm just going to create another land board. Now I'm going to click on this little checkerboard here and open the Create Render Node window. I want to create a PSD file node, not a file node. A PSD file node has this attribute here, link to layer set, that's very important. So now we load the file. And in this attribute link to layer set, we're going to set it to color. That means it's linking to our group color, and it will use color or anything inside that group color for the texture itself. So if I was to go back to Adobe Photoshop right now and say paint it blue, or whatever your texturing needs are, click save. Remember, you have to save it, otherwise Maya can't read it. Go back to Maya and click reload. It will load that blue texture I just painted and assign it to our sphere. Everything else about this is pretty much like any other Adobe Photoshop network, except you made it yourself. Thanks for watching this tutorial.